Conversation is going round. People talking about the colors come to town. Fresh as a summer breeze, she'll take you by surprise.
Good morning and welcome to another fabulous episode of Fresh Waves here at Whistle FM. We're having a great show today, but I say that every day. To start off this Wednesday morning, I'd like to give a big shout out to Jay Rumball, who is at home recovering from surgery and kidney problems. He's now on dialysis. And rumor has it, Jay, that you'll be back here next week or the week after for sure. So Jason is just getting well, and we wish you a speedy recovery and just want you to know that everybody here at Fresh Waves is rooting for you. And I think the whole town of Stouffville is actually rooting for you right now. So speedy recovery, Jay, and hope you're having a good day. Big shout out going out to Reeser's Market and Bakery, who's been supporting this show since its inception 7 years ago, and they provide us with the fabulous muffins that we have in the studio today. And of course, it's fall harvest season, so go into Reeser's and see what great fall harvest they have for you. Today, we have two really good segments. In the first hour, we'll be talking with Harry Renaud, and we'll be talking about lifelong learning in Stouffville and what that's all about. And in the second hour, we're going to be talking with cybersecurity expert Claudio Popa about cybersecurity for your kids. They're all going back to school now. What's a safe password? What do you want to do as a parent to make sure that they're not on websites that they shouldn't be on? And all that kind of fun security stuff that we now have to worry about with the internet. But to start off, we're going to talk about lifelong learning with Harry. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Brenda.
Now, how are you today?
Just great, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here. It's a lovely day in the neighborhood, I always feel, and we love to have learning. I'm a curious person. If I had my way and the name hadn't already been taken, I would call this show the Curiosity Network. Fresh Waves on the Curiosity Network. Because I think lifelong learning makes for really good brains, and it makes for really good, well-connected people. So tell us a little bit about this lifelong learning Stouffville.
Well, lifelong learning is a lecture series, and it's really governed under an umbrella organization called TAN. T-A-N is the acronym for Third Age Network. And it's all about continuing learning, or continuous learning, put it that way. I was introduced to it by happenstance. I was invited to attend a lecture last year over in Markham, where there is a chapter called Lifelong Learning Markham.
Mm-hmm. And who invited you?
My wife.
Uh-huh. And you went as the good husband. You got a few points for that one, I bet.
I had to keep the good wife happy, so that was great. And I went somewhat reluctantly to that because the speaker was going to be talking about the history of the Beatles, and I'm not a big music fan, so it wasn't something I was terribly interested in. However, having gone to that, I was enthralled for 60 minutes. This chap came out strumming a guitar and sang basically for 60 minutes and told us about the history of the Beatles, which I found very fascinating. So we're not musically oriented, but in this particular case, it was one of those oddities where this chap came out, Professor Mike Daly spoke about that. And so I went to the next lecture and thought, this is kind of interesting. And it's the fastest 60 minutes I've ever spent. The format is that the lecturers speak for 60 minutes and there's a Q&A following it. And I thought, why am I driving to Markham? Why can't we do this in Stouffville? And that's how we got started here in Stouffville.
Wow. So it's a chapter of an organization that already exists, but you run independently.
Yes. As I understand, there's over 40 chapters in Ontario now called Lifelong Learning, or derivatives of that title, Lifelong Learning. There's one in Markham, there's one in Aurora, and I believe Markham is going to go to a second chapter as well. So we've been very fortunate here in Stouffville. We had this idea. I put a couple of people together, people who I knew that were attending the one in Markham. We sat around a table one day and said, why don't we do this here? And we did a little forecast and thought, well, if we can get 125 people in Stouffville to come out to our series, we'll be successful. Turns out we had 242 people.
Wow.
At the spring session last year.
Wow.
Very successful.
So how many lectures did you do? Just one or two?
The series is 6 lectures. And we sell it as a series, as a session of 6 lectures, 6 consecutive Mondays. Markham do theirs on Monday morning, so we decided to do ours on Monday afternoons. They run from 2 to 3. It's a 60-minute lecture series. The lecturer has to come with an audio-visual presentation, and obviously the expertise of the topic they're talking about. And it's been very, very successful. People, we received all kinds of wonderful comments about how people have enjoyed the series.
So give us an idea of what kind of things were talked about last year. What were the lectures like last year?
Well, I talked about Professor Mike Daly, who talks about music, and he does it with strumming his guitar. So it isn't just a lecture; it's a little bit of a song routine that he does, and it's very, very entertaining. We had Tan Campbell, who is I think he was the last orphan who came over from as a result of the Vietnam War. He was the last orphan out of Vietnam to come to America.
Oh, cool.
And he tells about that experience in a 60-minute lecture, and that was unbelievable. It was awesome. Excuse me. We had Carolyn Harris, who spoke on the royalty in the 21st century. So all of us are talking about royalty, but we really don't know much about the royal family in the current situation, in this current century.
Right.
And she gave us a little bit of background on that. Then we had Professor Adam Chapnick, who's talked about Canada in the world, just to give us some perspective of the influence that Canada has. And we hear news media about how important Canada is with our relations in China and the United States and all the rest of it. He gave us, not in a non-political sense, but more of a historical sense of Canada's role around the world and how we've done peacekeeping and those sorts of things.
Interesting.
Very fascinating. It was very interesting, absolutely. We had Professor Lee Bartell, who talked about how music can impact your health and how they use music in different scenarios now for people with Alzheimer's and surgery and that sort of thing. Again, a huge brain teaser, for sure.
No pun intended.
Exactly. And then our last speaker was Martin Galloway, who talked about gardens and microcosms of environmental realities in your garden. So he was talking about bugs and weeds and plants and flowers, things that you and I deal with every day but have no idea what we're talking about.
Right.
And he's the expert. And he was very humorous. And so I think all in all, the term that I would use for these lecture series is the word edutainment, because it's educational and it's really fun.
That's a nice little word. Did you invent that?
No. I stole it.
I like it. One of my favorite words that I invented is a minor technicality.
Yeah. That's right.
I like that one.
Exactly.
Okay. So, those are fascinating topics. How did this all start? I mean, you said there were people sitting around a table and you thought, let's do this. But that means that you must have a curious personality as well.
Well, I've had some organizational opportunities in my life, in my career, my working career, and I just thought this is going to be something to do. I'm retired now and looking for something to do. So I met up with some people who I knew here in Stouffville who were attending these lectures and asked them if they wanted to participate in a discussion about doing it in Stouffville, and they all jumped into it. So Charlotte Cave, who is a successful business lady here on Main Street, was one of them. Gail and Bob Priestman, who have a successful business on Main Street. There were others that Charlotte introduced me to. We had Norma Card of Card Appliances family.
Right.
And Norma's on her own as a realtor. Shona Freubel came from the library, our beautiful municipal library. And Carol Langford, who fortunately for us is a Stouffville resident. She is the treasurer of TAN, so she has all the experience on speaker selection and speaker negotiations and those kinds of things. So she was a great asset for us. And my wife was another one who came along. We had another couple who unfortunately had to leave us for other commitments they made, but they helped us with some marketing issues that we still use today. So we're now a group of 7, all volunteer workers. We meet, there's a subcommittee of the 3 ladies that I mentioned earlier who are the speaker bureau, and they choose the speakers from a roster that they gather, either references that people have told us about or from the TAN organization, who have a roster of speakers that you choose from. Choosing the speakers is really the spinal cord of this whole thing.
Absolutely.
Without good speakers, we're not going to be much value. And so all the people who are invited to speak have this reference and background as being good speakers,
right,
regardless of their topic. So the 2 things we want is a good topic and their experience speaking. And they all come with audio-visual presentations. So every lecture is supported with an audio-visual presentation.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a little break now and pay some bills. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Harry about lifelong learners and, of course, find out some more details, cost, time, place, and all that kind of fun stuff. You're listening to Fresh Waves on Whistle FM, and we'll be back right after this. Stay tuned.
Claudio here with knowledgeflow.ca. If your family has been the victim of cybercrime, cyberbullying, or malicious privacy abuses, you're not alone. It's happening every day and sometimes carries tragic consequences, as we've seen in recent news. What's the solution? Don't internalize it. If it's an urgent issue, call the police immediately. If, however, you would like professional advice, you can confidentially email report@knowledgeflow.ca and get some ideas for dealing with social media, instant messaging, webcams, hacking, identity breaches, etc. Remember to visit knowledgeflow.ca on Facebook and potentially arrange a seminar for your community center, your school, or your Board of Education.
Hi folks, Kim Mitchell here. You know, however you choose to get around, your ATV, your snowmobile, your boat, car, if you have a motorcycle, all these things take 100% of your attention and skill to operate safely. Alcohol impairs that, and bad things can happen. So, be smart, okay? You know what I'm going to say next.
This message brought to you from the Safe and Sober Awareness Committee.
And we're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson, and this morning we're speaking with Harry Renaud of Lifelong Learning Stouffville. Now, Harry, before you got into Lifelong Learning Stouffville and retired and everything, what were you in your other life?
Well, I've done a number of different things. I've had a good working career. Most recently, before that, I was the executive director here of the Chamber of Commerce in Stouffville.
Which is always a fun thing to do.
It was a fun thing. It was a 3-year stint I did. At that time, the Chamber was sort of in between, I guess we'd say, and I was asked to take it on, and I did, and enjoyed every minute of it, bringing in new membership to the Chamber and putting the Chamber back on the map here in Stouffville. So that was fun, and a good opportunity because I was relatively new to Stouffville. I had moved here at that time 9 years earlier from Toronto. Although a Montreal-born person, I moved to Vancouver and spent some time in Vancouver and came back to Toronto and ended up here in Stouffville, retiring in Stouffville.
So when you were moving from Toronto to Stouffville, was that a conscious decision to get out of the city kind of thing, or? Well,
it's funny. My wife was a farm girl, and when we looked around, we looked around most of the province of Ontario for places to retire, and we looked at the Ballantyre Golf and Country Club community. And I remember saying, God, you'd take a week to get a loaf of bread here. That was back in 12 years
And bring
ago.
your passport while you're at it.
Yeah. But then the next year I was invited to play golf there, coincidentally, with a friend. And we went back to this person's house after golf. And I thought, this is kind of cool. 5 minutes after golf, I'm sitting on a nice patio having a cold beer. Mm-hmm. And so I called my wife and I said, we're going to move to Ballantyre. And we did 3 months later.
Wow. So, I really like that community, and they have a lot of good things going on in that place.
It's very active. Very active, yeah. In fact, we just finished our summer games where we had over 700 participants in the community playing. The summer games are biannual, and they're based on the Olympic model. So we had 700 people in the community participating in all kinds of crazy games. I mean, you can go golf and tennis, but there's also euchre and some passive games and some field games and some fun games. And we gave out 650 medals, and every night we had dinner for 400 people on our community center.
Wow.
It was fabulous.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah. I know a few people who live in there, and they even say the Christmas decorating of the streets and things is a blast, and they have so much fun.
I take credit. I don't take credit. That's on our street, Legendary Trail, where my neighbor Bob Ross created this idea. We all have inflatable Santa Clauses. Yes. Or snowmen on our lawns. So you come by there and you'll see 92 inflated snowmen coming down on the Legendary Trail.
Okay, and that's very unusual for a gated community like that, where, some of them, they tell you what color you can plant your flowers and things like that. So that's kind of unusual, but a lot of fun. Good for you guys.
Not to mention half of them are in Florida.
Right. They're not even there. Yeah. You get a lot of snowbirds. Even in your community, I imagine you do have a lot of snowbirds.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. But sometimes the snowbirds tend to stay for Christmas and then leave right after,
or
right?
Come back for Christmas, for sure.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Okay. So in your other life, even before the Chamber of Commerce, did you do things that always kept your mind active and things like that?
Yeah, well, I'm a CA by profession, and I left that profession, ultimately became the chief financial officer of the Montreal Expos Baseball Club, so I got accustomed to sort of the public factor of an organization. Although I was running the business side of it, I wasn't on the baseball side of it. And from there, I moved to Vancouver to become general manager of BC Place Stadium, at that time the world's largest air-supported dome stadium. And I managed the
Now,
building for 5 years.
That's a big challenge because
fun.
those places are notorious for never really making money.
Well, probably true. This is why it was government sponsored, but it was it was built for the World's Fair in 1986 in Vancouver, and then it housed the football team. And we were hoping to get a baseball franchise in Vancouver, but it didn't turn out that way. So the building is successful. We ran major rock concerts and conventions and that sort of thing. So it was that was a lot of fun. It was a huge challenge to keep that building active.
I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, off the top of your head, how much does it cost to run a concert for a big band?
Well, I'm going back now 20 years ago.
Doesn't matter.
And we would sell 40,000 tickets, or they would sell 40,000 tickets at $100 a pop, and the band would take 80% of that.
Wow.
So it was a lot of money.
A lot
of money in one night. But by the same token, I remember when Michael Jackson's tour arrived at them, and there was 12 semi-trailer trucks rolled up to the stadium and said, "Here we are, let's get started."
Yeah. And then there's also massive insurance that is required for bands like that too, isn't there?
Right. Well, that's why they don't do them anymore. They don't do concerts now like they used to concert. They were so large and so intricate and so expensive. The money involved, I mean, they had organizations or situations where the band was playing in Vancouver tonight, for example, and the advance party was in Edmonton setting up for the next night.
Right.
So they had duplications all over the place.
Mm-hmm. And those are super expensive, and because I know even for charity events now, where they used to bring in bands and have these massive concerts for charities, they can't do it anymore because the cost of insurance knocks out all the cost of anything else that they're planning on doing.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story my favorite story I tell. When the Pope came across Canada in 86, I think it was, he finished his Canadian tour in Vancouver. And I was the co-chair of the organizing committee in Vancouver for that particular event. And the day of the event, he was supposed to fly to Prince George, but the weather clouded in, so he couldn't go. And I got a call from the RCMP saying, "Could you host the Pope in the Dome Stadium 3 hours earlier than expected?" So I said, "Yeah, bring him on."
Yikes.
We have a convention kitchen, that sort of thing. So anyway, the Pope and his entourage show up. And he is exhausted. The trip is over. He's on his last night. His face is the color of this white piece of paper. And I finally went up to the bishop who was running the whole situation. I said, "Is it possible for me to meet His Holiness?" Oh, he said, "Yes, absolutely. Come with me." So he drags me along. And the Pope was sitting there totally exhausted. And I thought, "Oh, my Lord, I don't know what I'm going to do now. Am I going to go to confession? What do you say when you're going to meet the Pope?" So he puts the hand out, and I kiss the ring. And I said to him, "Your Holiness, when you're speaking tonight in the stadium, make sure you speak very slowly because we have an acoustic problem." It was a concrete building. He looked at me and he said, "Thank you, young man. I've spoken in many stadiums in my life," and sat down.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And he probably has.
Yes, I'm sure he has.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. So those are huge jobs. Like that's not little things that you were doing in, your typical 9 to 5. So you're used to having high pressure jobs. There's a lot involved in those kinds of things.
Well, the key to the whole thing is if you have organizational skills, which I think I do, you need to surround yourself with good people. And once you do that, the job is much simpler than people think it is.
Yeah.
And in this case, same thing with lifelong learning here in Stouffville. I've got 7 great people who don't mind doing the tasks. I mean, they stepped up. Charlotte Cave said, "Well, I can do a website for you." So she designed our website. Bob Priestman does all our technical work because he works in that background, as does his wife Gail. Carol Langford was able to coach us on how to select speakers and do that sort of thing and how to organize. So there's all kinds of abilities that people have that when they donate their time, if you can corral that into a committee, you're lucky. And that's what we've done with Lifelong.
Wow. Well, and that makes perfect sense because, it's all about delegation, right? Everybody does their job. And then, as my grandmother used to say, many hands make light work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
Everybody's doing their job and then things will run like clockwork, so they say.
And now in this day and age, it's so easy because you can do things online. So the only way to register for this series is to go online. We don't sell lecture by lecture. We sell the whole series. But it's relatively inexpensive. $55, you get 6 lectures.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible because, people expect to pay that kind of money for one lecture.
Absolutely.
And I know that some of the TEDx events, they're $100 or more for a ticket to these events.
Right.
And you're seeing the same caliber of speakers by the sounds of what you're bringing in.
Well, we're very fortunate. We started out with a very cooperative venue over at Spring Lakes Golf Club. They were terrific and set the room up for us. But we had our first year 242 registrations. So we were cheek to jowl there in the ballroom for us. And now we're expecting over 300.
Or cheek to cheek, no matter how you look at it, right?
So now we're expecting over 300 in this fall session when we open registration next week. So we've moved to East Ridge Church, East Ridge Mission Church on 10th Line.
Yep.
We're going to use their auditorium there because the seating capacity is larger. So we'll grow from some 240 to over 300.
And it's larger, but it's also comfortable. I like the seating at East Ridge. It's a nice,
and
it's a nice
and
sanctuary.
it's designed for for a lecture series, right?
Right.
I mean, with all due respect to Spring Lakes, they did a marvelous job for us.
Yes.
Mike Five at Most Excellent Productions helped us with our sound systems and those sort of things. But he won't have that challenge as big there in East Ridge Mission Church as he does as he did at the golf club. But they were terrific for us.
Yeah. Wow. And then again, look at the people that you're talking about. This is taking a community to put on an event like this. And, it is not a seniors only event, is it?
No, it's not. I want to dispel that connotation that it's for senior, if it's for retirees or seniors. It's adult, really. So because of the time of day that we do our lectures and it's weekday, I understand that we don't attract the people who are business people or career people, but nevertheless, it's not just for seniors, it's not just for retirees, it's for all adults.
But I'm a big believer in thinking outside the box. If someone's working, take your lunch from 2 to 3 and come to the lecture.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Forgo your morning break.
Yeah,
Eat your sandwich in the car.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
that time slot's not that bad. But it does obviously cater to people who are retired or
more or less,
or self-employed.
And the full gamut is that the lecture starts at 2:00. It's an hour's lecture. We take a 15-minute break, and during the break, the attendees are asked to write out questions for the speaker. We give the speaker those questions unedited, and the speaker filters through those and answers those questions, which is a very fascinating part of the event. So that lasts about half an hour, where they ask questions that are directed at them from the audience. So they want clarifications on some statement they made during their lecture or whatever. You get that sort of one-on-one response.
And I think sometimes that ends up being the best part of the lecture.
Yeah.
I went to the Kim Fook talk when she was over at the Baptist church there, the big one on Kennedy and Stouffville Road.
Yes.
And they normally have a little tiny room there where they were going to have it, but there were so many people that responded to wanting to see her speak. And after her whole speech was over and all of her slides were finished, one of the questions that was asked was, how did you end up in Canada? And let me tell you, that was a half-hour story that was more fascinating than the first story, because the first story we've all kind of heard in one way or another. Obviously, it was way better to hear it from her.
Yes.
But the second story was such an adventure unto itself. I was so happy that I stayed for the Q&A, because that, honestly, for me, was the best part of the whole thing.
Well, I agree, and it's so typical. So many of our attendees come to the lecture, and the lecture's over, they leave, and they don't stick around for the Q&A at the end. And in many cases, the Q&A is more fascinating than the lecture itself, because you get some one-on-one direct information that wasn't delivered in the lecture.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have to take our next little break here. You're listening to Whistle FM. This is Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. This morning we're speaking with Harry Renaud, and we're speaking about lifelong learning Stouffville. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.